Call today's meeting to order. The school committee meeting for March 5th. We are being recorded by Westwood Media. Does anyone else like to record today's meeting? Okay, great. Why don't we start with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Great. So we're going to start with the superintendent's report.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I wanted to start by mentioning that we have a couple of exciting student events coming up in the month of March. So mark your calendars. The high school musical, which this year is the Addams Family, is going up on Friday, March 13th at 7:30 p.m. and then Saturday, March 14th at 2 and at 7:30. And I want to make sure the school committee knows that Aisha is playing the role of Morticia. She is the lead, so that's extra incentive.
I'd love to see you all there.
Yes, exactly. So that, I think, is going to be exciting. And maybe you can fill us in. So I think that the cast has been going around to some of our elementary schools. What was that about?
Yeah, indeed we have. So this Tuesday, and actually today, we went to all the elementary schools and we performed a few clip-its from the show. And then we also did some activities with the students. And one of the main themes of the Addams Family is talking about inclusivity and how family can mean anything. And so we did a few activities with all the elementary students, kind of highlighting those messages.
Oh, that's great.
That's great.
Thank you for doing that. That's fantastic. Well, I look forward to seeing the performance. And then on March 19th at 7 p.m., we have Encounters with the Arts, which is our annual event that is a really wonderful showcase of both the visual and performing arts. So if you haven't been, I encourage everyone to attend. It's a wonderful evening for people of all ages, so families are invited to come. Lots of activities for kids, but throughout the sort of the auditorium wing, we have student art on display, the gallery will be up, and then in each of the art studios there are different activities and events. Sometimes they let kids throw play on the wheel and things like that. The auditorium will have a series of sort of 10 to 15 minute performances, drama, music. It's really a fantastic evening. So that is March 19th at 7 p.m. So on to a few business items. I just wanted to alert the school committee that we're making a change to the requirement to have a 7D license to drive the school van. So basically the impetus for this, we recently assessed how we're using our 7-passenger van. So we have a couple of vehicles that we transport students in. We have the 7-passenger van, which right now is designated as a school bus and has the school bus sign, and you have to have a 7D license to drive it. And then also the what we call the mini bus. You may have seen it. It's fully branded with Westwood that our athletic teams sometimes use, or our extracurricular groups. So we recently just reassessed how we're using the 7-passenger van, because how you use the van is what determines whether or not it's a school bus or just a school vehicle. And it is clear that our van is not a school bus. So the definition is the bus has a fixed and permanent route for the school year. And the way that we use the van is oftentimes our students, for instance, in our transition program or maybe in our flex program, are going out into the community, they're going to job sites, those kinds of things. So it's in no way a school bus. So we have decided that we don't need to have that 7D license requirement. The process for getting the license and keeping the license is rather arduous and unnecessary for our purposes. And we also, frankly, given how we do use it, like the idea of it not being labeled as a school bus in some of these contexts. So we checked in with other towns and also with Tech, our collaborative, and our plan is in keeping with what other people do. So we will provide in-house training on safety regulations, but that's it. Next topic, I wanted to say a few words about the middle school schedule review. This is exciting. So as you know, one of the Thurston School Improvement Goals is related to reviewing and revising the Bell schedule. We've been talking about this for quite a while. It was something that came out of Mr. Redmond's entry plan. So Mr. Redmond and Mr. Kuklin interviewed potential consultants. We've now entered into a contract with someone who will begin work this May. The consultant's going to conduct a number of meetings and focus groups in the spring, and then we'll work with a representative committee. The work will go through next November, and at that point we should have a plan. The goal is to have the committee make a recommendation to Mr. Redmond, who will make a decision about the schedule. I am going to serve on the committee just to make sure that that connection to central office is there. There may be, staffing and budget implications, so I want to be thinking about that. And we're also hoping to have a school committee liaison to the committee.
Well, if you need a volunteer.
Volunteering. We would need to have someone appointed by the kickoff meeting in May.
Okay.
So that would be the time frame. And
Volunteer?
What's that?
You have a volunteer already?
Yeah, volunteer.
okay, I don't have the dates, but I will get them to you.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank
Well,
you. We love a
it was an
volunteer.
issue that came up years ago, right? And in a very different way. And so I think it'd be interesting to evaluate. I'd love to be part of it.
Great.
If somebody says that's okay.
It's all you, Carol.
All right, fantastic.
Oh, middle school schedule. Okay.
Thank you for volunteering. We appreciate that. Okay, then I wanted to say a few things about COVID-19 and coronavirus, a topic that I know is on a lot of people's minds right now. I have quite a number of things to say. So I know you all received a letter that I sent to the community yesterday. I also sent another update tonight. You may not have checked your inboxes in the last couple hours, but it's there. So I want to emphasize that the district has been in very close communication with local and state public health officials, both of whom are receiving their guidance from the CDC. So I've been on the phone personally with a number of people at the state DPH over the last few days. I think all of us know from what's in the news that this is an evolving situation. Guidance kind of changes from day to day. However, public health officials are continuing to remind us that the risk of contracting COVID-19 in Massachusetts is still low. The CDC guidance related to people who have traveled overseas changed as of today, and so that was partly the purpose of the letter that I sent to families this evening, is to make sure people know that that guidance has changed and that the district will be implementing that guidance. So that guidance is that students who travel to any of the CDC's designated countries who are in level 3, right now that is China, South Korea, Italy, and Iran. And if students travel to those designated countries, they will need to stay home for 14 days after their return, regardless of whether or not they displayed any symptoms. And so we really do need families' cooperation in alerting us when students or their family members have traveled to countries identified by the CDC so that we can make sure that we're taking appropriate precautions. So we will ask for people's assistance with that. That guidance is retroactive. So if there were students who, or an individual who had traveled previously and still were in the 14-day window from their return, the CDC now says, well, now even retroactively, we want you to sort of go home for the remainder of that 14-day period. And that guidance, the district will continue to implement that guidance as long as it's in effect. And I say that just because some families may be planning to travel in April, over the April break. And obviously, we don't know what the situation will be in April, but I just want to foreshadow that if the guidance were the same, then that is what the district would expect upon return. I want to commend our operations department. They have been working very hard over the last several days, and I very much appreciate that they understand the importance of their role in this situation. Last weekend, the district took steps to clean and disinfect all of our school buildings, and we will do that same process this weekend. We also have daily cleaning protocols that include lots of attention to high-touch areas, doorknobs, keyboards, those kinds of things. The district currently has a sufficient inventory of cleaning products and disinfectants. We've been getting some questions from people about that, and I want to assure people that we do have an inventory. Our operations department has been on top of this. They have ordered ahead to make sure that we have a bit of a stockpile of these things. There are some things like hand sanitizer that is now difficult to get. But we do currently have an inventory, and so we are currently stocking our hand sanitizing stations around our school buildings.
And where are they typically?
Often in lobbies or the entrance to cafeterias, things like that.
Where they are?
They're very public. I think that they know. There's one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're public, but like anything else, for a kid, that kind of starts to blend.
Starts to blend. We
So
can point
maybe
that out.
it's just a nice reminder. I'm sure parents are reminding their kids that
Yeah.
they should wash their hands and whatever, but
Yeah. we
maybe
can-
just a gentle reminder of here's where they are and take full advantage.
I'll admit that we won't have, I mean, there won't be one in every classroom.
No,
So
that's-
there's always gonna need to be the regular hand washing. Soap and water
Right.
is for most uses, but these are in places where you might not immediately have a bathroom, or you might have a crowd, and it might be more convenient to use that.
Yes,
So I
right.
agree, yeah.
Yes. And, we certainly will make sure the kids have plenty of time to wash hands and do what they need to do. We had a conversation today with nurses about getting into our, particularly our elementary classrooms, just to review,
Good.
the proper protocol for hand washing. So, Charlie had asked me a question that I think is important about whether the decision to close a school, if for some reason that became necessary, rests with the district or with some other authority. So I will say that, I could imagine a situation where schools were directed by the Department of Public Health or by the Department of Education to close. So that's one possibility, and we would obviously follow that direction. However, there could also be some specific situation relevant to us where we felt that we needed to make a local decision. And so we certainly could do that. If there were a situation that required closing for a day or two, that would probably be akin to a snow day situation, where it would be a local decision and then we would make it up at the end of the year. In the event that for some reason we needed to close longer than that, at our discretion, then we would have to be in contact with the Department of Education and seek their guidance about what the plan would be. They do have a process to get a waiver for the 180-day requirements. Sometimes there are districts who have just significant weather issues, for instance, and they can't possibly make the days up. I think, however, this is a situation that we will have to consult with people should it ever come to pass. I'm not anticipating that, I want to be clear, but if that were ever the case. And, I do want to say that obviously, safety is our primary goal. And then secondary to that would be providing continuity of instruction. And I do want to assure people that we have given that some significant thought. The district leadership team actually was just meeting today at 5:30 to review some plans that we have in place and to sort of think further about it. Clearly, you can't replicate school without being in school, but we think that by leveraging things such as some of our technology infrastructure, there would be some good options. The format and structure of school would not be the same. It wouldn't just be trying to sort of do school from home. We would be thinking carefully about that, using both synchronous experiences where maybe a class could be online with their teacher, or asynchronous things where sort of here's the task that you're going to do and then we're going to check in it at some time. So we have, we have some plans if that ever became necessary. I mentioned that Abby and I had a conference call with the district's nurses today. Tomorrow, Abby and I will also be attending a meeting as participants on the town's emergency management team. And this is just to review established protocols. The town does have an established pandemic, procedure and protocols in place. And there is a team of people who are familiar with these things, and so we're getting together to review all of that. And we similarly have district preparedness plans and protocols in place already. I will be participating tomorrow afternoon in a conference call for superintendents with the Commissioner of Education. And I imagine that some of the things that we're talking about tonight and thinking about will be covered during that call. So, my overall message is that we are really thinking about this. I think we're on top of it. And I will continue to update the community periodically. If there's information they need to know, I will make sure people have it. And I will be just checking in with the community so that they have some sense of what the status is. Lastly, the governor issued guidance yesterday requesting that schools cancel overseas trips over spring break. So that is, a sad piece of news, but we do have a high school trip that's scheduled to go to Spain this April. And so unfortunately tonight, it's my recommendation that we need to move forward and cancel that trip. And I wanted to bring that to you. If we should make that decision now.
It
Yeah.
also would be worth looking at if this was not a problem at some other time in the future, whether that trip could be covered.
Rescheduled?
Reschedule, what's possible, cancellation, do you put your money down, do you? But
Right.
at some time, if things cleared up, it'd be nice to think
be
there's an
postponed.
alternative. It may not be, but at least to look into it.
Okay, so I will, I'll work with Mr. Bevan and the teacher chaperone, and we'll get in touch with our travel company and, see what the options are.
It's worth noting, Emily, I'm sorry to interject, but of the 33 students enrolled in the trip, I think 28 of them are sophomores, so
Oh.
the
Oh, good.
ability to
Okay.
still have that trip. And this is a trip that is a visit to another school. It's our yearly one, every other year, right off with the schools, so we'd have to coordinate with their ability
Okay.
to.
Oh, but great, so there is some
Yeah.
possibility.
So
Okay,
there are some
good.
silver linings here, yeah.
Okay, great, that's good to hear.
And I have to say, I know a few kids on the trip, including my daughter, but I was amazed. I mean, they were very just, oh, okay, and we understand. It's just like a testament. I was like, oh, they'll be devastated, but it was just a testament, I think, to the kids in the district.
Yes, that's great. The situation is what it is. That's great, they're handling it well.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then the other trip I just want to mention tonight is we have our 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C. scheduled not until June. There has not been any guidance issued about travel other than international travel, but we are getting some questions from parents about that, so I just want to say that out loud. And we are very aware that there is a cancellation deadline in our contract with the tour company. That deadline is April 10th. So we know that that is the date. It's on our calendar. And I don't think that we have to make that decision now. I think that we could wait a bit longer and see how things emerge and, what the guidance is. The April 10th cancellation deadline, there is a non-refundable deposit. And frankly, I think it may be in our interest to wait a little longer and see if some other guidance comes out, because that might be a leverage point to work on getting the whole thing refunded. So that's my
Okay.
thinking, and maybe something will change and the trip will be viable.
It might be
That
worth
sound
also contacting the parents to say, if you want to pull your kid out of it, would like to know that ahead of time, because there may be people just don't want to wait.
Yeah.
But if we found out so many kids were not going to go, that might affect our decision too.
I think having had this conversation tonight now, Mr. Redmond will probably put something out to parents and just say, we had this conversation, this is the strategy, and we can bring that cancellation deadline to their attention, and that would be good data. Okay, great. Anything else?
Anything on this topic that you want to talk about or ask?
I just would, well, first of all, thank you for all the work you've spent on this, and it's
been
very
a lot of
important that you're
work.
doing it, and hoping that we're not going to go any further. But when one is looking at other places and what's been happening, they've closed all the schools in Japan and Korea and New York City and Seattle. What I'm concerned about is some of these things take a lot of time to prepare for. So if you find out late, you're less prepared. It's all the issues I'm interested in, and I think we're in a pretty good position technology-wise. But if we were, the worst-case scenario, to close for 30 days or something.
Uh-huh.
Can we be creative now and beginning to think about how we can keep in touch with the kids?
Yeah.
So I just suggest, if we haven't already done it, and then the kids with computers is one thing, the kids that don't have computers is another. How do we contact and keep thinking going on if that happened? Hopefully it never will, but, I just think it doesn't, you can't do that in a week or two. It still takes a lot of time to
No,
think it
hopefully it
through.
never will, and I want to assure people that these are exactly the things that we have plans for. So, that issue of, does everybody have access to technology? Does everyone have access to internet? We have mechanisms for that, and just using that as an example, we have these portable hotspots. We would make sure that every kid had access to the internet, because that would be important for our instructional plan.
And that's what you just referred to, that you were just meeting on.
Yes. So I'm not suggesting that it would all be perfect, but I think that we have some solid plans for that.
Yeah, and I'd also just thank Chris Coleman and the entire team on the municipal side.
yes.
It's been a real partnership, I think,
Good
between the schools.
collaboration. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. So anything else on that topic? Just have one other thing. So I just wanted to loop back with the school committee about the cell tower, because you had voted to not renew
extend.
the lease.
Right,
Yeah, and so I'm just bringing to your attention that Lemma has moved forward with communicating that decision to AT&T, and that Lemma and Ken have been working on the details for the transition to not having the cell tower there, and that the tower will be removed by the end of this calendar year.
Do we know, one, what the impact is, and two, what their plans are in terms of where they're going to put the tower? Exactly. Because it's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, so I believe that
On
they are
top of my
working out
house.
a lease somewhere else, is what I know. So I'm sure there will be another location for the cell tower in town, and there will still be AT&T service.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. I don't have much to add. I mean, I've been working with them. There are a few contacts. AT&T is a big organization, so that's been the challenge there. But they, we have some things to straighten out. We've been telling them very clearly that we want to make sure we have continuity of service, and especially since they've been working on a new lease, so I'm kind of aware of that, and that we're sending that concern out. And the other is that we've got to have our building restored to the state that it was. So this is in our lease, and so we're going to be communicating with them about what steps they take to restore the building and the cupola at the middle school to the original condition.
Right. So when you say it's an AT&T tower, I know that's where the contract is. Do the other companies use the tower as well, right? So it's not just AT&T. My guess is.
In our lease agreement, it didn't have a specific provision for them to give us any additional payment or notice if other companies were using that same tower, so that's not built in.
Oh, no, I don't mean it from
Yeah.
that, but I mean, the impact is not just on
Right.
AT&T customers,
It
correct?
may be a wider impact.
Right.
Yeah.
Just curious.
But they have signaled that they're working on a new lease, so we think it'll be okay.
Thanks.
That's it for me.
All right, great.
Okay.
So I want to move on to the update in the air zone. So I think we have some building updates. Was there anything else other than building updates that anyone had from either any PTOs or other air zones? Okay. Maya, do you have, I know you have a few things you want to
Yep.
share.
So first, since our last meeting, the school building committee evaluation subcommittee presented 7 options to the full school building committee that it recommended we move forward on the short list. Those options are, one is Hanlon renovation only, just bringing it up to code. One is a Hanlon addition and renovation for 315 students. One is a new Hanlon only for 315 students. Then we have 3 options consolidating Hanlon and Deerfield at Hanlon. We have 1 option consolidating Hanlon and Sheehan at Hanlon, and 1 option consolidating Hanlon and Sheehan at Sheehan. So those are the 7 options that the evaluation subcommittee has recommended we move forward. We presented those options to the community this past Monday night at the community forum. And I think the SBC will be voting on whether to accept, to have that be the formal shortlist at the March 20th meeting. assuming that that is the final shortlist, then the evaluation subcommittee is then going to take that shortlist and move forward. The evaluation criteria that was used for the full 15 options is going to be revised a little bit. There'll be more things that we add, specifically redistricting will be looked at, and we'll also take a deeper dive into some of the other criteria that we have to really be able to flush out the 7 options we have left. And then they will, the evaluation subcommittee will then run all 7 options through the evaluation criteria using the same form of matrix that we used to get to the shortlist. And that will be presented to the SBC for recommendation in late May, and assuming that this will be the final solution. And that recommendation will then be presented to the community, I believe, on June 4th. And the SBC will take a final vote on that final option in June. So that's where we are in terms of process. Clearly, that involves redistricting. It could potentially involve redistricting, could potentially involve consolidation. And if the final solution does involve consolidation, then that means we will have, we're either going to have 1 remaining school if there's a consolidation, or we'll have 2 if there isn't a consolidation. And so I don't know if you recall at the last SBC meeting, we raised this issue of the remainder school, and we discussed, maybe the school committee should look at things that we could do to address the remainder school. And so there's 2 things I want to talk about with respect to the remainder school. The first is, and this is for our discussion purposes, so I don't think we'll vote on anything tonight, but for the first option that we could do to move forward with the remainder school is we could submit statements of interest to the MSBA for both Deerfield and Sheehan, since we don't know if one or both of them will be left off the MSBA project. We would submit statements of interest for both. The deadline to submit a statement of interest to the MSBA is in April. So we would submit in April for both Sheehan and Deerfield. Yes, Sheehan and Deerfield. We would find out in December whether or not we got into the process for one or either of those schools. In June, but backing up a little bit, in June, when we make the final decision about what the project is, if it's a consolidation, we would pull the school that is being consolidated with consideration from the MSBA. So we'd be left with 1 statement of interest.
What has been the experience of our group of consultants in terms of school districts that have received MSBA money, who have immediately, applied for another school?
So it's a very good question, and we actually had our OPM call the MSBA and explain today,
Right.
and explain this is something we're thinking of doing that we were going to bring to the school committee to discuss.
Right.
And what do you think? And the MSBA essentially told us that Hanlon would remain the priority school, that any statement of interest we submit would have to note that Hanlon is the priority school.
Okay.
And that this statement of interest was being submitted, sort of behind Hanlon, if you will, if it's the priority school.
Right.
And that's really what they said. We sort of take from that that unless there is a dearth of applications at the MSBA, which there probably won't be,
Right.
we're not likely to be voted into eligibility for based on our statement of interest, because Hanlon is still an active project, and that is, in their opinion, the priority school. Having said that, we don't see any harm in submitting the statement of interest.
How much
anyway.
work is involved in it?
It's a little work.
It's a
Yeah.
We talked about that. And
So, I mean, it seems to me that you have an awful lot on your plate right now.
Resources.
And, to submit an entry like that is going to be refused, when you have all of this other work to do, doesn't seem to be a good use of your time, in my opinion. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. I mean, I think that it is, even if it's just a little bit of work, because we've already done it, it's still work on top of
the current building project and this coronavirus. It's like
Yeah.
the
But
other
it
time.
isn't just a little bit of work. If I.
It's some work, I mean, I would
yeah.
clear, like, we'll do it, you know,
Yeah,
if we,
I
if we
know,
think that
I
that's an
know.
important thing,
Right.
then we'll just do it.
Right.
And we can take a look, I mean, honestly, the good news is that because we're in this process right now, we
Yeah.
actually have a ton of information about these buildings.
Right.
And so, you know, we wouldn't be starting from scratch. We certainly would have some things to do, and we could take a look and get a sense of, I mean, we did it once before. So,
The other thing is that, would it be, in terms of, if we, say we got refused this year and then wanted to apply again next year, would they look at it and say, you know, these people think they're gonna get a school
well,
every year?
yeah. I mean, we can keep submitting and submitting.
know,
Districts
I
do
know,
that,
I
so
know.
that's not a problem. I mean, I think that our sense is from talking to our design team and our OPM, they've
Right.
been through it. I mean, I think that they think the odds that we would get invited in are
Slim to none.
quite low. And certainly, you know, our question to the MSBA was just to make sure that it wouldn't be perceived as somehow like running afoul of the process, that we're
Right.
throwing in these SOIs for schools that are still in contention
Yeah.
in the feasibility study. And we got their assurance that wouldn't be a problem. But, you know, May I kind of quoted them there. So it wasn't a hugely encouraging statement. But, you know, we don't know. We don't know how many districts would apply.
Yeah.
So,
And we don't know the condition of the schools
We don't
that would
know.
apply.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we know the condition of Sheehan and of Deerfield, and it's, you know, they're definitely in need.
yeah.
And our architects even would argue, I think, that Sheehan, you know, maybe more so than Deerfield, but it's work, you know, and that's why we're sort of thinking this through.
Yeah.
And do we want to put it in and just see what happens, knowing that the likelihood is pretty low? Or the other thing to think about is if we do go through if for some reason we are actually accepted, it will slow the time frame down for that remainder school project. I would say materially, than if we were just to move forward with that remainder school project on our own. Because
But then there's the other part of that,
The
which is
financial.
you would probably get the second school done because you're gonna get money, you're gonna reduce the number
Right.
for the taxpayer, so
You would-
you're
you would
more
reduce it.
likely to get it through.
it will take longer, which means
Yeah.
the cost of construction will go up, most likely, but you will be getting reimbursement. But that's assuming we get it in year one. If we get denied in year one and we try again and we get denied, you know, from when you're accepted, so we were accepted for this project in December of 2017. We're gonna open in fall of 2023, so it's a 5-year process, really. So if we don't get in until December of 2021, then we would be looking at opening in fall of 2026.
Yeah.
So that puts it 3 years behind.
That's the thing that I've been thinking about, is just timeline. I mean, there's clearly tremendous advantage to getting into the process and getting some funding, right? On the other hand, what we've learned from this process is that the process takes the amount of time that it takes, and there really isn't a way to fast track it or to speed it up. So, you know, if we put in an SOI this April and then found out something in December, I feel like we're still on the same timeline that we are right now, right, at that point. Although, then you're in eligibility and feasibility.
disagree.
So
I
you think
think-
it's clearly the fastest thing is to somehow make a decision and then just do it locally. Right?
Absolutely.
I guess the distinction I mean to make is, if we waited and put in an SOI a year from April.
Right.
And then don't find out anything until December 2021, and then have to do eligibility and feasibility.
Oh, yeah, it's pushed
That's just pushing it out a long ways, and I'm thinking about the conversation that we had at school committee last month, where Lemma was talking about, you know, sort of the urgency of the timeline in terms of some of the capital issues.
Right, so the money we would have, so there is the, part of the analysis, is the money that we would have to spend in the interim if we have to start fixing roofs and all, what's that
It could
Hardware
equate the
plays.
amount of reimbursement we get.
Maybe.
I think it's that plus any rise in construction costs. The
Right.
combination of those two things is gonna be significant if it's a 6-year, 7-year timeline before the
Right.
building
So-
opens.
Yeah.
Say we don't apply for MSBA money.
Mhm.
What is the plan?
So that brings me to the second point.
Before that, so are you just, what is, I mean, do you want to start, you're just looking for a guidance, and you'll make a call or give us, I mean,
Yeah, I mean.
There
so
is
I-
no plan yet, because we, right?
No, this is just, this is
This is an initial discussion.
and this is a question, but my concern, the reason that I raised it
Yeah.
is that the deadline for putting in SOIs in this cycle is April 8th, which is the day after our school committee meeting. And so, I mean, it is still, well, no, we would not be able to turn that around in 12 hours. So,
Something.
Lemma might be able to.
right,
All
she might-
nighter.
yeah, that's right, get it done. But, you know, so I'm looking for some guidance because, and I do want to clear, I'm confident that we can make it happen. We can develop 2 SOIs. We can do it. And so it might be worth just doing it, throwing it in there, seeing what happens, and.
Yeah, I
it-
mean, I would say,
Yeah.
if you start doing it, and it seems like it's a tremendous amount of work, and you're all drowning,
Mhm.
then maybe we have some kind of, we have another, I don't know, you reassess,
Mhm.
and I'm happy giving you the discretion.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can do that.
So
but-
why don't we look into it next week?
Yeah.
And we'll get a sense of like scope and what would have to happen. And then in my Friday update to you, I'll
Okay.
let you know what we think
Okay,
at that point.
that's fair. Thank you.
Um,
I'm good. You
Because
guys
if
good
it
with that?
looks doable, it might be worth it just because then you're keeping options open.
Right,
and-
right.
yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
So that's the first idea of how we can move the remainder of school. The second idea, and I had floated this, I think we talked a little bit about it at the SBC meeting. I mentioned it a little bit at the community forum, but we have this idea of whether the school committee decides to allocate some funds to commission a study for the remaining school.
Right.
And the good thing about that is that we can decide to allocate the funds now, but we don't have to designate a school, like we don't, so it's not like we need funds for Deerfield and for Sheehan, right? Because in June, we'll know, and in June, we can sort of hit the go button and have the designers basically do a study of that site and give us something very similar to what we currently have for the 7 options, that sort of level of detail.
Although I would say a much smaller scope, I mean,
Right.
you know, the
It's
project
not a-
has total
right.
clarity
We're
at
not
that
gonna
point,
get
right?
15 options,
Right.
we'll probably get 2 or 3.
Right.
But this would, depending on which school it was, it would either be for a school at Deerfield of about 225, maybe 250, and at Sheehan, maybe about 325.
325,
We'd have
350,
to,
somewhere in there.
look at the numbers. But that's something we can parallel track with the statement of interests, so that if, we put the statement of interest in and it doesn't go anywhere, at least we've moved this remainder project forward. And then eventually we can make the decision, we don't have to decide any of this in the near future, but we can decide whether or not the school committee would or recommend going to the town and asking for design money funding. That would be the next step after the study, but that wouldn't be for at least a year.
So, just give me the timeline for that. So we would take a chunk of money to do the study from
Right.
our budget.
Yes.
And then we go to what, town meeting?
Well, and once we have those plans, if we decide, we would
Yeah.
go to town meeting.
Which town meeting?
Ideally, we do it at the same one where we vote for the MSBA project,
Which would be,
2021, spring 2021.
okay.
We don't have to, we could conceivably even do it in fall of 2020 if we wanted to.
Okay, go ahead.
And then we would ask for design money, not design and construction.
So design money in 2021,
Yep.
okay.
And then we'd go back to the town and ask for construction money.
And probably
And-
22, probably?
Yep.
2022?
Probably,
Yeah.
And that's the referendum question too. All right. So 2022 would be the year that we would be asking for money
For the
for
second
the
school.
second school, and the first school would open up in
2023.
2020.
And then the second school would presumably, assuming we're on the same timeline, open in 2024 or 2025. I would say 1 year, 1.5, 2 years later. And I'm basing this entirely on our current schedule, so.
And so, I mean, in just being ready to hit go
Yeah.
in June, which I think is important. I mean, I will say the number one thing that I hear from people when we're talking about this building project is this question, well, what's going to happen with the remaining school? And I think for a lot of people, the question of the MSBA project and then what's going to happen with the remainder school are tied somehow, right? And I think they just want to know what the plan is. If we are ready to hit go and start this study in June, that doesn't lock us into a timeline. That's going to be the first step, no matter what timeline is
Right.
determined after that, right? So, I think what you laid out is sort of there's like the most aggressive.
That's the most
Yeah.
efficient, right, that's assuming this project moves forward full steam the same way that the MSBA one has.
So we'd be asking for money for the second school in 2022. Is that what you just said?
I haven't really mapped it
No,
out, but very roughly,
And for the first
and I really need our
school,
architects and
2021 for the first.
We know spring of 2021 is when we're asking for the first school.
All right.
We know that.
Okay.
In the June, that would be a vote of the school committee, and we can fund that, because it's a relatively a small amount.
We're thinking it'll be around 30,000.
You could fund that out of,
And I think we can fund that, so we can.
I would
vote to
suggest,
fund that.
we have some mitigation money from university that we just funded out of that.
that's fine, okay.
Yeah, so, and we can maybe take that vote in April or May, so that when June comes, we can just kind of move forward with it. But that would be the second.
We take that vote in April. Why would we push it up to May?
We can take that in April. I mean, I want to make sure everyone has as much time to digest
I
and
mean, again,
discuss.
to Emily's point, if we have to put it in our back pocket, we keep it there. But at least
Yep.
we've done it and we have some
And we
idea
have something.
of what we're looking at, and it gives people a sense of what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
So might as well move
Right.
it on.
Great.
And to echo Emily's point, I do think that there's a lot of anxiety in the community about the remainder school. I have anxiety about the remainder school.
Can
So.
you sleep at night?
So I think that the sooner we at least have a plan, the better. And
What
that's
I-
just
what I
the right
think
thing
is,
to do.
It's important that we're sensitive to that issue. We've heard it many, many times. And that we feel we have 3 schools that need work. And the state says you want money, there's 2. So it's not like we made the choice, but so we're looking for money from the state, so we're going to choose 2. But we're not stopping the planning for the 3rd. We're going to continue going. There may be obstacles, but we're going to keep going on for the whole package. And there may be other obstacles we have to deal with, but it's not like we chose only 2 to do it. That's the way we get, if you want to get state money, we're crazy to not get it, but that's not the whole package. We're looking at the whole package. And I think that gives people some confidence that we're not just ending our work at once this thing is done, and then it's not an issue anymore. It's still an issue that's on the table for us to continue working on.
Right.
Whatever the vehicle we use, but that's going to have to be. Now, a lot of people aren't going to want to hear that. They have other ideas.
But on the other hand, can we also alleviate the anxiety? I mean, I know you say you're anxious, and we want to have if it turns out that we're going to build a new school on the Sheehan, for example, can we reassure folks that, kids are going into school next year? The school is sound. It's not going to cave in. We still have our great teachers, and we still have a lot of great teaching and learning going on. So I'm concerned that when we say, continue to say, we have these schools, we have these old schools, we do, for sure, and we do want to get the second school built, but kind of like with Corona, we're going to be okay. It's, let's just.
Yeah, we're going to be okay. Kids are going to learn. Teaching and
Yes.
learning's happening.
It's-
That's all
the kids
fine.
coming through are not gonna suffer.
The question becomes, one of financial. Yes, are we continuing to sort of throw good money after bad to
Right.
keep a building on life support where we could be investing it
For sure,
forward into a project?
But
Yeah.
the reality too, for sure, and I think we're all in agreement that way, but the reality is there are kids that are going to go in next year and the year after.
Yeah.
And I'm worried that parents are out there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe my kid is going to step into the Sheehan School or the Deerfield School, and that's not where we're at, right?
I mean, we
Yes.
prioritize the safety and the condition of the buildings, and we do what we have to do.
Right.
So, we're purchasing new equipment for the Sheehan this summer. I mean, when something needs replacement, it just has to happen. We don't have another option B of
Right.
like trying to ride it out and hoping that if the heat fails, we'll be okay in the winter. So we just have to be prepared, and that's the mindset that we've taken in all of those decisions to make the appropriate repairs.
And I think as time goes on, those Band-Aids will just become more and more expensive.
That is,
True.
that's what it is.
So if we can come up with a plan to avoid the really expensive Band-Aids 4, 5, 6 years from now, then
that's
that will be well done.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Are there any restrictions to the mitigation money?
No,
So it's
we can use it for
carte
this
blanche?
purpose.
Okay,
That's great, yeah.
good to know.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
Ma'am?
No, that's it.
You got a time anyway.
What?
past time,
I'm
mate.
way out of my time.
All right, good. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, good. Why don't we move on? Public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to make comments. I ask people to state their name and limit it to 2 minutes and address any comments to me as the chair. Is there anyone who has any comments tonight? Okay. It's been a quiet year. Seeing none, let's move on to the discussion
Did you
items.
say it's been a quiet
It
year?
has been a quiet year.
But a busy year.
Yes. A tiring year. All right. I think we're going to welcome Steve now for the student screen usage update.
Yes. Before Steve gets started, I just want to say that Josepha made a comment to me on the phone that she thought this was an excellent report, as did I. I reread it again. And you asked if other districts were doing similar things. It turns out that our own Steve Willett, I think, is a leader here, that he has presented this to his colleagues in the Tech Collaborative and is also presenting a workshop next month, I think? Or is it-
This month,
This
actually,
month.
yeah.
The Medfield Digital Learning Day, which is a big technology conference.
They've
that'll-
actually rebranded it.
Oh, did they?
Design Your Own Learning Day. 'cause
Oh,
they
I did
don't-
not know that. Okay.
It's not about the technology, it's about the learning that happens, and so.
I stand corrected. But, so, Mr. Willett will be featured there, providing some of this
Yeah.
research. So,
Great.
I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. I know I have limited time, so I hope you read the report. If you didn't, please,
Very
I encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you. There's just a lot of information. I'll just try to hit the highlights, key takeaways, that kind of thing. This slide, I think, really tells a story. So I chose to kind of look at how things were in 2013 versus 2019. And I chose 2013 because that's actually the year we first went one-to-one at the high school. And sixth graders back in 2013 happen to be high school seniors now. So there was a little bit of thought behind taking a look at this comparison for those reasons. And what's really interesting is that back in 2013, 52% of then sixth graders had a smartphone, and now 84% have a smartphone. And that number's probably ticked up a little bit since this report was done. This is part of the survey data that I acquired. The other interesting trend is that if you look at the red graphs, which represent current sixth graders, they're also getting smartphones at much younger ages. So we're seeing kids getting them in grade 3, grade 4, and then a pretty significant spike in grade 5. This is not germane to Westwood. This is, I'm sure, I could put this slide up anywhere, and it's really just the way it is. Bottom line, students today have significant access to technology. They have access to a tremendous amount of digital content, games, apps, you name it. And while this slide has nothing to do about school-based technology, I think it's important to obviously think about this changing landscape and what are the implications for how we do use school-based technology. Okay. So as I was thinking about this topic, I decided to focus on these three kind of guiding questions. What does the research say about screen time? What does our own data show about screen time? And our own data came in the form of a survey of students from grades 6 through 12. We surveyed about half of them. So we have a very good statistically significant sample size there. And then kind of look at those findings and really ask the question, what adjustments, if anything, should we make as a result of this study in terms of like how we handle school-based technology. Go ahead. In terms of the actual research, kind of the two kind of leading authorities are the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics. And, they've looked at meta-studies and kind of synthesized this information, and there's been this convergence of where they're kind of landing. And they've definitely moved away from this idea of like setting a strict quota on technology use, like a certain number of hours, depending on your age or something to that effect, and really looking at the context of how is technology being used, and that's more important than actually just, how much is being used. And I think that's important. I think it's also a very pragmatic approach, considering, how things are when you look back at the previous slide. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, if you want to go ahead. With that in mind, I kind of started thinking of these buckets, and the bucket on the left has all these resources that we use in schools. We have, Google stuff, spreadsheets, video creation tools. I think they fit very well in this active, creative, community building kind of context bucket. Then you have this passive, consumptive, isolating bucket with all our streaming services. And I will be the first to admit,
This is what we use.
This is the adult. Right here.
we're all there.
You don't know what that is.
But I will be the first. I love a good Netflix show. So I'm all over that. But I think we can all agree that moderation is obviously important. And so that's an interesting one. If you click ahead, Emily, there's also these other things. Okay, we have social media apps. Does anyone know that one in the top left corner?
Isn't that Snapchat?
Snapchat. Okay. We've got 2048, Minecraft, so on and so forth.
See, if you don't have TikTok on.
Yeah,
I
where's
know.
TikTok?
Where's TikTok?
I'm a little behind. I'll
the
get
good one.
there.
Especially when the girls.
But what's interesting about those apps is you could argue that they belong in that bucket on the left, because they are community building. They are active. And Minecraft, is all kinds of creation going on there. But the thing about those is sometimes they lead to objectionable content, and they are just time sucks. I mean,
Call of Duty.
in addition to the passive consumptive side. And what I worry about is if you expend so much time on these resources, these apps, what are you not doing as a result of that? What is it taking the place of? Face-to-face contact, doing things outside, whatever. So that's an interesting little category over there. Next slide. If we take steps to lower the use of technology resources in school, and I tried to kind of imply that by shrinking that bucket down, I actually think we're missing out on an opportunity to kind of teach kids about the productive kind of creative enhancement that they can get from their education by using some of these resources. I would also go so far as to say, as adults, we are kind of quick to label students as digital natives. It's a little bit of a myth, no offense. I would say that without our guidance, most students would not learn how to use a spreadsheet, how to code with Scratch, how to use advanced search operators to find and vet credible resources on the web, and generally how to use technology for strategic purposes. Okay, and there's a big difference between that kind of use of technology, and then the stuff you see on the right. So I think we have actually a responsibility and an opportunity as teachers to build those skills that I think will serve students very well as they move on to post-secondary life, whether it's college, career, or both. All that being said, I definitely think we could do a better job, and there are opportunities to look at paper and pencil approaches to instruction that may be just as good as technical, using technology, or maybe even better. I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but, you know, all things being equal, I think that's something we need to look at, you know. Does technology necessarily serve in our best interest? If you want to move forward, so survey data, I'm going to kind of switch gears here. So this slide there's a lot going on here. But the one on the left is middle school, the one on the right is kind of a mirror image of that, but it's high school. Full disclosure, these numbers are probably not perfect, but they're a pretty close approximation for actual technology usage for students on a typical day, okay? And that would be a typical student. There's a wide range. But on average, we're seeing roughly 300 minutes of technology use per day for middle schoolers and about 364 for high schoolers. Again, that can vary, but I think we're getting a general idea. The blue and red graphs represent academic use of technology, and then the green and yellow represent non-academic use. And to further complicate things, there's like the in-school version of that and the out-of-school version. Was that clear to everyone? What's notable is I think that the academic use is fairly equal between middle school and high school, but you see an uptick in the non-academic use as the middle schoolers transition to high school. I've got two theories on that. There are definitely more rules at the middle school in terms of personal technology use, so we see much smaller numbers there on the graph on the left. And then conversely, at home, and that came out in some of our surveys, is that there are more rules that parents are imposing on students at home when they're middle schoolers, and there's a lot more kind of freedom, so to speak, for high school students, so we see higher numbers for particularly out-of-school technology use for personal, non-academic reasons. So, anyway, those are those numbers. We also asked a number of opinion questions of students. So, I'll let you look this over for a minute. I think they're fairly self-explanatory. Generally, they're pretty neutral, the first two, in terms of response. The bottom one about digital writing assignments, no surprise. Kids definitely favor using electronic resources for writing assignments. I couldn't agree more. I can't imagine writing anything by hand. Yeah, you can edit, you can recover your work much easier, and more importantly, the feedback mechanism it's just unparalleled. I mean, teachers are able to give feedback to students regularly and often, and that has really helped, you know, that whole process. And obviously, the idea that students can collaborate on documents is another real benefit of using digital resources as opposed to like writing things by hand.
So, but can you go back? So that was, sorry, this was the high school? Or
So this is high school and middle school together.
So I mean, I actually find that first question interesting. So I would interpret that as they've had, because if you look at neutral as a negative, which some survey experts say you look at, I read that and saying people don't want any more. Kids are not at, basically they're already feeling that we've done enough on the technology side. I don't know. How do you interpret that? I'm seeing the majority of kids don't want any more.
Yep.
That's what that's
So
saying.
there's a slide coming up
Okay.
that would suggest that there is a little bit of that feeling with
Okay.
kids. I did not look at those particular results
Yeah.
and consider it a negative. I just felt.
I don't mean a negative,
they're-
it's just,
They're kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like in the middle. We're generally
Yeah.
pretty good with it. It's a bell curve. But these are high school and middle school combined, mostly because there was really no variation between
Yeah.
high school and middle school. The next slides show variation. This is where I started seeing some interesting trends. So, middle school, they're generally saying that they prefer digital handouts versus paper. And we see a clear shift when students get to the high school. Not entirely sure why, because what's interesting is, and I don't have it in the slides, is that students actually reported that they really liked having digital versions of things because it helps them keep very organized. You know, everything's there in Google Drive, easy access and that kind of thing. But at the same time, obviously, there seems to be a little bit of, at least a kind of a general preference towards paper over digital.
It could be, just thinking of my own educational experience. In middle school, you're learning how to study, right? In elementary school, everything is kind of spoon-fed. In middle school, you're starting to sort of be more independent in your studies. And then in high school is where you really refine that. And maybe they're finding that in middle school, they're still sort of like, oh, I don't really know what works for me or what doesn't work for me, and whatever you give me is fine. But in high school, they could be finding that, as the work gets harder and the load gets more intense, that could explain the shift, that they actually study better with paper handouts. I don't know. I see my own kids in middle school, and they have electronic versions of everything. You can't print them.
Yeah.
And me, I'm thinking, how can you study if you're reading it on the screen, right? You can't underline, you can't highlight, you can't. They don't complain.
If
But-
I was answering the survey, sorry to interrupt, I would probably be a little further to the right on that.
Right, I would
I
too.
carry a notebook around with me. One thing that we learned early on was that teachers were telling kids, feel free to take notes on the computer. And that went away very quickly. There's a lot of research that says digital note-taking is inferior to hand
Right,
notes.
'cause
So
when you write it, you
that might be
remember it.
somewhat
Yeah.
related to
Yeah.
what you're describing.
Yeah.
I certainly feel that way. I write everything down by
But
hand.
isn't that generational? I mean, isn't
But
it?
I don't
mean,
know
the
if it's
kids-
generational.
The kids today are just, they're so comfortable on the digital.
But I'm really comfortable on the, right?
No, I know, but you're not as comfortable as the little kids who can.
But are they learning?
Come on, you're closer to a boomer than you
You
think.
should ask them.
Okay, boomer.
So, well, it's
Oh, yeah, what would you
interesting.
call them?
So it's
No.
interesting you say that because one of the
Still-
things that I
still
haven't done
stinging.
yet is to have like some focus groups where we
Yeah.
talk to the kids. Because I look at this, I can hypothesize all I want.
Yes.
what do you think? We do have somebody.
Run sample of one, right here.
Personally, I think I like having like a tangible object in front of me because it's it's almost more interactive. Like you're using more of your senses. Like you're able to touch it. You're able to I don't know, feel it more. And as I forget who said it, underline words.
Yeah.
There's kind of more of an interactive nature with actual printed papers. So personally, that's what I prefer. And also studies have shown taking notes by hand is better than taking notes
Yeah.
on a computer.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And I
good.
think that's a shared opinion.
Oh.
Yeah. I would agree. That's good. Focus group done.
Yeah. You can help on their write-up for the state, that's how I know.
This I found very interesting as well. So we just said, in general, I spend too much time looking at a screen, school and personal use combined. Again, kind of a bell curve at the middle school, and I'm seeing a message at the high school that they agree with that statement.
Yeah.
Again, I have theories, you might have different ones. I think there's a novelty at the middle school where maybe the technology is a little more new and it's fresh and they're kind of moving in that direction and they're good with it. At the high school, maybe that novelty has worn off a little bit. Not to mention, based on the numbers themselves, high schoolers are on screens for a longer amount of time. So I think they're aware of that. And another thing I don't have a slide on, but about 75% of students have reported that they're actually using some kind of strategy to limit either their screen time or distractibility, putting the phone on Do Not Disturb, giving it to mom and dad and said, don't give this back to me until I'm done with my homework. Like, they actually came back and said they do that. So it's interesting. I actually appreciate that from the high school students, that they're being honest and saying, you know, I think I sometimes look at a screen too much.
For distractibility, I think that some kids struggle with the Chromebook as a teaching tool, because while you're doing your homework, you know, you jump on Google and you Google this and you Google that, and the next, and I don't know how to solve for that, aside from saying, are you distracted? Don't get distracted. Are you, you know? And I don't think there's any way to solve for it.
There's
but-
there's no answer, and it's so interesting. We had a whole bunch of school visits when we first went one-to-one. We had districts come in, we brought students in, and that question came up a lot. And a lot of the students said that over time, that they learned strategies and they figured out how to regulate it, but it doesn't happen immediately. Like, they do whatever
Right,
they
it's
need, you
kind-
know what I mean?
It's very individualized, I would
It's
imagine.
very individualized, you know.
Well, it's an interesting skill to develop, because when they get to the workplace, my lord, you have to
Yes.
learn to deal with it
Yeah.
so much, and it's not getting any better. So I'm sure there is an uphill battle for that. And
Yeah.
some of us probably should have been fighting that battle earlier in our lives to deal with it.
I agree. So just some findings and considerations that we're thinking about. Go ahead, Emily. So encourage the intentional use of tech. We have a framework called SAMR that our tech coaches use. It's basically a way to kind of think about learning objectives and pair it up with technology and make a decision about whether or not it's a good decision to make. I wanted to reiterate this idea of all things being equal, consider non-tech options. And I think that's important. We've communicated that to staff. From day one, we never said, we're giving these devices out, and there is an expectation that you use them for, you know, for this, that, and the other.
And Steve, the same framework, so it's an acronym, right?
It is.
It's
It's
substitution.
substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And it's basically, substitution would be doing a digital worksheet versus an analog worksheet. And there's no functional difference between the two. And as you move up the continuum, you're starting to see a separation between, like, technology can do something that a non-technology approach can't. So that's that framework. Share the report with teachers. We sent it out to the entire staff back in January. I am very happy I'm thrilled about this, that at the middle school, they're doing study groups. They've already started this spring or winter, and there's a group of about 7 or 8 educators at the middle school that have created a group called Effects of Technology on Students Promoting Healthy Habits in and Out of School. And that was a direct result of sharing that report with teachers. So I'm thrilled to see that that is happening. We continue responsible use instruction for students. I want to emphasize we've shifted it also to teachers. So we are offering a district PD course about how to be a good digital citizen for staff. I think there's no better way to teach digital citizenship than having staff model those habits for kids in the classroom. It's very authentic when it happens that way. And then lastly, and I think this is probably one of the most important things we can do, is partner with families. We've done some parent programming. We had Dr. Elizabeth Englander come in this fall. We had screenagers. I sat on a panel for that. We have the parent portal for the filter that we use, where parents subscribe and they get the weekly email reports. And we're considering a how-to workshop for parents with very concrete suggestions about things they can do at home to help help manage technology. Things as simple as, like, settings you can put on an iPhone that limit or restrict certain apps or set timers or things to that effect. So we're considering, and we haven't really put it in motion yet, but I think parents are craving
Yeah.
guidance in that area, and that's something that we're thinking of. And the very last thing I want to make sure everyone's clear on is that this is all part of a district priority. I've pasted that in at the bottom. This comes out of, the work of the leadership team, and this is a priority to look at creating a healthy, safe, well-balanced technology environment here in Westwood. That's it.
Great report.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Other questions?
Really interesting.
I'm
thank you.
passing
Thank you,
it on
Steve.
to my grandkids.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're heading over to the summer enrichment, expanded day rates. I think it's also connected with the building use, right?
I can tackle those.
Yeah, turning over the lemma, yep.
So the first one, summer enrichment, I have some memos here for you, but the highlight is that our tuition rate for summer enrichment has not been adjusted in 10 years, and expenses have exceeded revenue for the past 2 summers. And that deficit doesn't account for some school-based expenses that we have not historically charged to the summer enrichment account. It's just really based on the staff fees and the supplies that they use for the program. So the tuition hasn't covered those basic costs, not to mention other impacts like custodial. And so we are proposing an increase that would start this coming summer, the summer of 2020, so that the first week is $190 and the weeks ensuing for any family or student is $170. And then there are subsequent increases. The objective here is to both correct course and make sure that we're breaking even and always paying for the costs that we actually incur in running these programs. And then we definitely looked at market rates, and we find that even with the increases, we will still be well within what's the market rate, if in fact more on the lower side. So there are plenty of local areas that are charging more for summer enrichment. So that's the first one as a proposal. I don't know if there are
Sorry,
any
can you say
questions.
that one more time?
For the increase amount?
Increase amount?
So for summer 2020, it would be 190 in the first week, and then 170 for following week. So if you enroll for more than 1 week, you could get that
What's the
170.
increase from, what was last year's?
The last year's was 150 for the first week,
Okay.
and 120 for the following weeks.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question on the differences in ability to pay. I found out Westwood, people lose their job. You got 3 kids they don't, do we have any adjustments or allows
Yeah,
ability to pay adjustments?
there has historically been an allowance for a scholarship, like a reduced fee or a completely waived tuition. And so we're accounting that we'll continue to allow that, and I actually, like, in trying to forecast what the appropriate rates would be, we expected that there might need to be 1 or 2 more of those, so the number of scholarships might increase.
Thank you.
So that's summer enrichment. There's a similar story with extended day, a little bit more nuanced, but the tuition rates for extended day have also not changed in over 10 years, and expenses here have also exceeded revenue in 3 of the past 5 years. It's a nuanced thing with extended day because we do charge to extended day some really expenses that the school incurs. So custodial or transportation, some of the expenses that we actually incur to transport students from one site to another or to support the cleaning and maintenance of the buildings, we have charged there. But I wouldn't say all of the expenses that we incur as a school district. So, and even with some forgiveness, the program hasn't been breaking even lately. The most important change, I think significant this year, is that we've also found that we need to change our staffing for extended day. So there needs to be more support for students within the staff model. That means some ABAs that need to be on staff, some aides that might support students with specific needs, and a nurse on site, at one of the sites at least, at all hours, so that we would have access to nurses as needed for students. So we are incorporating within the proposed rates an ability to fund that kind of staffing change, which we've already started to make this year because we just can't wait before, we don't want to postpone that at all. So the tuition here is tricky because it depends on what you sign up for as a family, but I looked at it from an hourly basis. So really it all comes down to a base hourly rate that then is multiplied out to, you know, and drives whatever tuition is charged. And it's currently about $4.25 an hour. There's a little bit of nuance for before school and after school, but roughly $4.25. And we're proposing $4.80 an hour for the coming school year, and then consecutive increases for the years after that. Again, because we're so far behind the market rates that it will take us a few years of increases to kind of reset, both be in a place where we are breaking even and also price according to the market. So that's our goal with that. And I've reflected some of the programs in our area and what they're charging, and we would still be within that range.
So I have to be honest, I have some concerns.
Sure.
This is a 43% increase over 3 years.
It is
And
significant.
I just, I could have gone with 1 year and then revisit. I just don't want to hit working families with, it would be over 3 years, a $1,500 family increase. I don't know, I just have some concerns about it. I'm okay with maybe 1 year and then we revisit,
Yeah.
but who knows what the economy will do. I don't know. I have some concerns I have to say about this one. I don't know what the committee's views are.
I feel, you know, I'm shocked that we haven't looked at this in 10 years, because that's
That's
shocking.
part of the problem.
So
Yeah.
I thank Lemma and Emily and her staff for looking at this time. I understand what you're saying. I mean, it's a sizable increase, and it is going to impact families who are, you know, using these services.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do it in,
I do think part of the planning and sort of phasing it out over multiple years, the idea was not to kind of jump all at once, but to phase in and see kind of the impact year to year. How does that do? It does give us
Yeah.
some flexibility to
One-
stop an increase if we get to a point where we feel like.
That's exactly it. One thing we've talked about is that we need to monitor the budgets on these programs more closely. And
absolutely.
so, you know, we could increase in year one and see how we do, especially with the new staffing model. And then based on that, you know, it depends on what you decide here. You could give us the authorization to go up to a certain amount, but we would have to look at it. I don't disagree with you that we're going to need to see how this model runs differently. There are some opportunities to reduce costs, I think, in extended day if we hire more proactively and try to seek staff. We've struggled with hiring. The flip side of that, so we might make more of a push effort to recruit people to work for us. But one of the possibilities is that we might just not be paying at market rates. So part of the reason for the long-term increase is to ventilate this and allow for us to increase pay rates as well, so that we can hire the staff that we need, because that has been a challenge for us.
Well, maybe what we should do is implement that increase for the first year and then revisit it next year.
We could do that.
Yeah, I mean, my concern, I take your point, my concern is that, you know, these programs have to break even. If
Yeah,
they don't, then they hit our
Can't be
operating
sustained.
budget, and they're not in our operating
Right.
budget. And so,
Right.
you know, we need a plan over time to right the ship. And so maybe it has to be a longer period of time.
Yeah.
I don't
You
know.
know.
You said here, it says 3 out of 5 years they've broken even. It just seems like a 43% increase. It's going to hit working families. And I'm not for it. At least I'm personally not for it. And maybe my people on the committees. That's a big increase. We went away from the kindergarten fee, and I don't want to earn it back here and hitting the
I don't
families,
think
especially when we may have a recession coming
I
up.
don't think anybody is in favor of increasing
43%.
fees and putting it on working families, but we also, if we have these programs, they have to be paying for themselves. I mean,
We should put it to a vote next month then. If we,
But what's the alternative if you can't sustain the program at the
well,
cost?
it's so 3 out of 5 years it's broken even. We're increasing it next year, and there's here submitted a 43% increase.
I
cannot support that, and I will not support that for residents.
I understand. I have one thought, Emily, that maybe
But
we
I don't want to
could-
hit working families.
Nobody does, Tony. You're not the only one. No one does.
Why don't I, okay, well then,
No one does, but we also have to have programs
Okay.
that, you know, that we can support. I mean, how are we going to run them if we...
we'll put it to a vote then next month.
The basic problem is we haven't increased in 10 years, you know, that's why.
That's-
So I have no problem with what Tony's saying, we look at it another year. My other question, we do adjust it for families' ability to pay. That
I was going to mention,
I don't know
we
if
have
we've
the
ever
same.
tried something like this. If a parent drops my kid off early, would it be possible for me maybe to come I got out of work maybe probably earlier to come and help the kids in the after-school. Or if, I could maybe come in the morning early and, any adjustment of parents who don't have the ability to pay as much to come in and just volunteer to help out at both ends because of their schedules being different. I didn't know if that might help
Yeah.
some people who, I'm
We
as
do-
concerned with just,
I want to confirm, we do have a mechanism now that we have had running for even the past 10 years for allowing parents to apply for a relief with the fees. So there is that mechanism, and so some families are granted scholarships and extended day in the same way that we do for summer enrichment. So that does happen. So I don't
but
deny
the
that.
rates also that you're charging are relative
We're low.
compared to other towns. We're very, very reasonable compared to
Yeah.
people in other towns trying to do the same thing, so. But I think, Tony, we'll look at it another year,
Yeah.
I think I need to visualize the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Can we get some kind of chart that says, current, and I know it's complicated because Wednesdays are more expensive and Mondays, and if you do extended day, but they have the chart on the website, right? So if you take that chart and you say current rates for 2019 through 2020, fiscal year 21, and the proposed 21, 22, and 20, or whatever we're proposing, I would like to see the increase in how we're going to get, because I'm sort of torn here. I absolutely agree that these programs have to be sustainable unless we decide that we are going to allocate a portion of the operating budget to them. And maybe that's something we decide, right? And that's a way to solve for Tony's issue, but we've already done the budget for 21. So on the one hand, very concerned about a huge increase for families, but I really need to see the numbers.
There's the hourly rate in here, and then there's a monthly rate that's based on an assumption of
Where
not.
are we?
It's right
Oh.
here. There's no before school attendance in that, and so this is for the afternoon program, is what the math would be based on. And I looked at like the weighted average number of hours that a family has selected in the afternoon program, so that's how I calculated the monthly rate. So it's, as you said, some families take only 2 days a week and some take all 5, and it varies. So we
Right.
looked at that and just said, what's the weighted average here? What do they typically take? And this was how we calculated that.
Do you
There's no
mind
question
breaking
there's-
it down more specifically? Because I'm just visualizing the chart they have when you apply. I'd like to see it sort of broken down by day and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we can.
So I think that the only sort of immediate question, I guess, is year 1. And I guess my question dilemma is, what do you think is the time frame for needing to have a decision so that we are moving forward? I mean, I think that the registrations, I'll ask Allison here.
Yeah.
It's typically May
We have-
is what I understand for registration. But I think what we've heard from Janet is she's got an interest in giving families, if we do any increase, even the
Right.
modest
Heads up.
year 1 increase, as much lead time as possible. So that's why we wanted to come to you as early as March, so we're not kind of putting this off to a last minute decision.
Yeah.
So maybe we sort of, we decide the increase for year 1. And then we look at the numbers more, we calendar another discussion. And in that discussion, we decide, are these programs worth subsidizing? Or do we pass the cost on? And if they're worth subsidizing, then in next year's budget, if that's what we decide, then next year's budget, we need to allocate for it. We can't, we would have it hit.
Really have to have that discussion in the context of all the other priorities, right?
I know,
And
but,
want to emphasize
you
that.
know, if that's what, if that's what.
Why are we even, how would we have that discussion? How are people going to be supportive of that kind of discussion? People have, we're charging for other things, so should we start subsidizing
No,
those
I'm
things
not
too?
saying we should, but I'm saying there's a question on the table of can we pass this? If this is the cost, if these costs are what we need to sustain this program,
Right.
then it seems to me there's a question on the table within the school committee of whether or not we're willing to pass that cost on to the parents, right? I mean, is that what you're saying?
That's one, we could get a bigger debate. Are we subsidizing sports? We could open a can of worms. I guess I just look at a 43% increase, and it's hard for me today, as a resident of this town, given what's going on in the world, given everything else, to support that. And especially when we move the other way in kindergarten fees, where we've made a decision to kind of take away, you know, so it's just where my reaction to, it's a
So
big
that-
number.
So that's
If it was
back
a
to.
5%, if it's just a big number, you know, they hit working families, it could be,
So
if you have
that's
3
my-
kids, it could be $5,000, $1,500, that's quick math.
So there's the question, though, then, and I think everybody understands that, but so what's, I know you're offering a possible solution of subsidizing. We
I don't
probably
see any
can't-
right.
Right, but we do have so many other priorities, as
Exactly.
Emily said.
I
So
know.
how could we even let this rise to the top? So what I want to know is, I get your point, but what, maybe we need to think about it for a month. What's the,
Well,
what's
I guess,
the?
I look at this, I don't have
If
any
it's
data
not
here.
sustainable, what do you
Well,
propose?
first of all I have is a memo here. I don't know what additional costs. I don't have any data here. All I have is a memo. I'm not picking on you. I'm just
Oh,
saying.
no, I don't-
And
it's okay.
look, if we want to open this can of worms, then let's do it. And let's talk about sports. Are we subsidizing sports in the high school? Because we are, right? The fees that kids pay for sports, I presume doesn't pay the full cost of sports.
No, of course it doesn't.
So,
So clearly, we didn't anticipate some of the concerns here, and I'm going to suggest
okay.
that at this point, what we do is, I'm going to suggest that we table it.
Okay,
We can
that's
come
fine.
back next month, and I would say that we need to make it our goal to at least have a decision in April for what we're going
Fair
to do
enough.
For year
next
one.
year, because I think it would be good to make progress
Fair
on
enough.
this
That's fair.
at some level that we think is reasonable for families, and then maybe we can come back at it and talk about a longer-term
Okay.
plan, because I think we need to take care of it somehow, and I think subsidizing it out of the operating budget would be hard. So let me give that some thought.
okay,
Think
that's
about
fair.
it. Okay.
I did, one bit of information that might be helpful to provide as well is whether these are project-ized or school.
Got heated in here, huh?
I can look into that.
Yes. Okay, we can.
I'm not sitting next to you at the next meeting.
We only got one left.
I know.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, well, we've got another fee-based
Uh-oh.
thing to,
Fees.
let's fasten our seatbelts for the next conversation here.
Put the helmet
Okay.
on.
Well, this one,
use of
we don't need
facilities.
the decision on this one tonight, so that's one thing to say up front. So at next month's meeting, we are planning to propose,
I'm coming back to haunt you.
we're planning to propose some revisions to the fee structure for building use and related policy updates to our school committee building use policy. So this memo starts to provide some context for why we would be making that proposal next month. And before I enter into talking about the financials, I want to say that we consider school buildings and grounds to be a community resource whenever they're not needed by the schools, and that's the mindset that I know has been behind our making available of our school facilities to other users. And specifically when it comes to school, town, recreation, or nonprofits that have a heavy Westwood support, we want to make the buildings and the grounds available at cost to us. So we're not in the business of trying to make a profit on that. Where this has been challenging is kind of a similar story. It has been far too long before, since we've reviewed the fees. So 12 years specifically since the school committee reviewed our building use fees.
What's going on?
I'm sorry to slam you with all of these, I've been saving them up. And it has not, so some of the things that have happened in 12 years certainly is we have had new custodial contracts that are enforced, and a big driver of cost for us when we allow our buildings to be used is the custodial support that's required for that. There's also, well, I'll dive into that. So for custodial specifically, as one of my first points, we typically charge for weekend use when a user group is in our buildings and driving custodial overtime. So we charge that to the groups when we haven't reset the rates, and our custodial rates have gone up about 7% over that period of time. We're just not charging that additional 7%. So we are often losing money on the weekends on this basis. Another thing is that we don't charge for custodial support on weekdays, and the rationale for that is that typically on weekdays our staff is here in the buildings. We staff them in the day and in the evenings. I mean, in the day obviously for school use, but in the evenings as well, so we're doing the cleaning and maintenance. There are events where the impact is really mild on our custodial staff on weekdays, and then there are events where it's more significant. And there hasn't been an ability to differentiate or account for that in our pricing so far. So if there's a food-related event where the custodian has to do a lot of cleanup, that hasn't been priced in. We've looked at like very, very ballpark math on utilities. It's hard to really measure if there's a utility impact, but certainly groups that are in here for many hours do have an impact because it drives more energy use in our buildings. So I started doing back of the envelope math, and I was saying, well, a group that might occupy 10% of this building on a weekend day could cost us $50 for that day. So it's not free, is the bottom line. Definitely this number would vary based on group. And then we have certainly a full-time staff member that does, I don't know if anyone is aware of this, but we have a full-time staff member in the school staff. We charge that entirely to the building use account. So the salary of the staff member is paid for by the fees that are generated through all of the charges that we make to user groups. And when we haven't reset the fees, cost of living adjustments over a 12-year period means that that hasn't really been accounted for in any fee increases. And it takes up a lot of our time. It's a good deal of customer service, and we pride ourselves on being responsive and scheduling well and adjusting schedules as needed, so that's part of what we do. And the last piece is damage. We do charge groups for damage if we recognize that there's something associated with an activity that happened in the building. I'll say some of our groups have been really good about coming forward themselves and offering to replace things. So we're very, very grateful for that, and that doesn't go unnoticed. And there are times where we just can't attribute it very easily. So there might be something that's damaged where it's not identified in the hour or two after a group leaves, and it's hard to tell if someone else has been in that space, whether it's really the user group or whether it's our students. So in these cases, there are costs, and I don't think any of that also it's hard to measure, but it's an impact that we really feel. What is charged, again, I can remind you, is like the coordinator of building use, the salary, as well as the custodial fees. Those are charged to the building use account. And in that account, we've had a deficit of roughly $15,000 a year for the last 3 years. We've managed because there had been a balance in that account, but it's going to be depleted. So this is why we're working on a proposal for next month to seek a rate change for building use. And we would be very mindful in that proposal to think about how to treat different groups and to continue our practice of pricing differently for school users, town users, who typically don't pay anything or only if they drive additional costs for us, versus a for-profit that might be really charged all the costs that are associated. So that's a highlight, but I'm seeking input on that. So if you have values that you think we should consider, guiding principles when we're resetting the rates, we want to hear from you on that, because I know that this will impact organizations that are in Westwood.
Well, I think the last item, you had a nice comparison of all these other towns and what they charge. I don't know if we could do that research, but, how do towns like us charge rec departments or town elections or, people want to come into a musical and rent the auditorium. It'd be interesting to see how do they do it, and maybe to approach people who aren't paying now, whether they could put into their budgets. I don't know, like, for example, do a lot for the rec department. I think we'd share all that with them, but are there any groups out there? And most of the youth sports are nonprofit, they're just barely getting by anyway, so. But it'd be valuable just to see if somebody out there been creative and be able to get something out of other groups. And also, are there profit-making groups that have used the building?
There are right now.
I mean, that would be worth, being sure we're charging them what our full costs are. But that'd be helpful, I think, at least to think.
We've started to gather that information, and I can present that to you.
And also, how long has it been, if we have made, last time we charged anybody, just as we talked about earlier, is it worth upgrading some of those fees? Are we way out of line with people, or are we way generous, or we're right in the group?
The general indication, I mean, there is a variation, as you see with extended day and summer enrichment. So there are some towns that charge similar rates to what we charge. There are also several that charge over. And I do think that we're undercharging specifically in certain areas. So there's some things, like the way that we rent out the auditorium, for example, it's a space that's tough to manage, and there's a high risk there if there's any damage to that space, and I don't think any other towns let it go for the rates that we do. And so there are some things like that that we could look at. the building use fees are complicated because rates vary by space type as well as by organization type. So the user gets a different rate and the space itself might have a different rate. So an auditorium versus a classroom versus, something else, access.
I think one of the goals that we have also is, because sort of there are different rates for almost different tiers, different kinds of groups, and over the years, things have sort of morphed, and people have gotten grandfathered in here, or, you've been charged that, so now we're going to continue to do that. And, we have this person who, a good chunk of her job is managing building use, and we would really like to have a more efficient system where it's possible to automate the billing and the invoicing and not having everything be sort of a one-off where she's got to, adjust. It's just not a reasonable system that we have.
It happens that she's very amenable to running with that and generating a system to automate billing. And the thing that's been holding her back is that we haven't set rules, very clear rules that are uniform across the board for how we charge organizations. So everything really has to be manually adjusted for invoices. And that's, I don't think it's an efficient use of our time. And actually, in thinking about the future in Westwood, and we're proposing a new building, there are exciting opportunities for what our buildings can offer to the community. So I think we need to build the efficient systems to manage them so we can support users well and do that.
For the damage issue, if it's a significant problem, if we are seeing that most of the time we're unable to identify, the damage or go after, have you considered just doing a flat fee on every, or maybe it's just for certain spaces, and sort of getting rid of the idea of this, you're responsible for damages, but everybody pays this flat fee, and that goes into the damage pool. A lot of, when you're renting a house.
Security deposit?
Well, it's not, you don't get it back, right? It's just a flat fee.
A non-refundable security.
Yeah, it's just a flat fee that would be less than a
Yeah,
security
right,
deposit that
right,
everybody
right.
pays.
Pay into an insurance
Right
policy.
now, they do pay an event fee,
They
right?
pay an event
But
fee.
it's all part of the same
It's all
math,
part of the
right?
same math.
in
But
But
terms
if
of-
you
yeah.
rent a house on the Cape,
Yeah.
instead of charging you a security deposit, they'll charge you I forget what they call it, a waiver fee, a
Yeah.
damage waiver fee, and
Right.
you pay it no matter what.
But then what happens when,
If there's damage, you're
there's
not
damage,
responsible.
even if you damage it and you know you've damaged it, all you say is
They
go
can
into the
certainly go
kitty
after you, but they don't have a security deposit to take from. right?
I'm gonna say, I think this is true based on our conversation, so I think this is one variable. I don't think this is
It's not the key issue.
It's
Well,
not the
then
key
forget
issue
it.
here,
If it's a major issue, it might make sense, but if it's not. forget it.
I would say we wouldn't raise prices specifically to cover damage. That isn't the priority. What is a priority is definitely covering custodial costs and starting to account potentially for a little bit of things like utilities. Accounting for the salary of the person who supports this 100% of their time. I think those three things would be the highest priority areas. And we recognize that some users are going to be almost free anyway, so others will have to pick up some of the costs. So a for-profit group might have to pick up more, relatively speaking, especially if we want to allow recreation and town users and nonprofits that are running charitable things here in our buildings to have reasonable costs. There's a lot to look at in building
Well,
use.
I just am amazed that this hasn't been looked at, and I really want to commend you
Yeah,
for
thank you.
doing all the
Finding all
work
this,
you've done. This is great.
I want to thank Lemon too. She's done a lot of work and analysis here, and
A lot of
I
forensic
appreciate
work,
that.
huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll come back next month with something
Proposal.
proposed. Okay.
I haven't seen the numbers yet.
We get something on summer enrichment, Harvard, because registration.
Oh, yeah,
is
summer,
down.
so the summer enrichment increase, we would like to have that in place if possible, because the registration starts, I think, in a couple of
March
weeks.
15th.
March 15th,
We can change.
Fine with that.
Yep,
Okay.
okay?
Do we need to take a vote?
I don't know.
let's do it.
Well, I
think we
mean,
should
might
do
as
it
well,
for
why
Yep.
not, right?
Let's put it in.
Okay.
Do I have a motion to accept the summer?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right, that's it on that? All right.
Yeah.
Let's get to policy changes. There's a bunch of them. You want to just give a quick, do we have, are these just readings?
So these are just readings.
Okay,
And
so-
so there's just a couple things I want to say
Yeah.
about this. So basically, the MASC which is the sort of model policy manual that we use, right?
Yeah.
MASC has issued this advisory about policies that they have updated in their model. And there's a whole bunch of them, and some of them are just little language changes. But what I did was I pulled out the ones that have been updated for Deci compliance, right? So these are more significant changes. So I'm going to skip the public comment one for a moment. So the policy about homeless students, educational opportunities for military children, educational opportunities for children in foster care. I think those are pretty straightforward. They've written them basically to be in compliance with laws and regulations. So those are pretty straightforward. The public comment at school committee meetings, I think also is a very important policy for us to look at. And so that again is about Deci compliance, but that stems from a court case in Massachusetts that happened about a year ago. And so I think, a lot of school districts right now are looking at this policy to make sure that we are in keeping with the law. And, this is one of those policies where, I think we're very fortunate in Westwood. People tend to come and make comments, and it's very respectful and polite, and we, really have had no issues. It's one of those things where you don't want to be making the policy to try to address a problem that has come up. You want to make sure that you're sort of making the policy, proactively and thinking that through. So this is the MASC policy, and I've looked at it, and it does seem reasonable to me. Of the four, I think this is the one that, we may, it's probably most important, and that potentially you want to talk about or even get some guidance on. So
So it says at the start of each meeting?
There's a sign-in requirement that we don't
Yeah,
do.
we don't do. So that's what I'm saying, that I think that this is the one that I think probably practically, kind of has a real-world impact, and we may want to look at this one more.
And there's no deadline, we can do it. So
No,
maybe people take
no
a
deadline.
look at, because I agree, there are some comments I already have.
Yeah.
Maybe
I'm looking
people
at
take a
it.
look at it, and maybe not discuss it today in the
Yeah.
interest of time, but
Okay.
maybe at next meeting, we actually just dedicate 10 minutes, because I agree, there's some things.
Yeah,
talk
this
about.
one's more
Okay.
complicated
Okay,
than the others.
that's
so.
fine.
Okay, great. So the others are just first read.
Okay,
Okay.
great. I think we move to action items.
Okay.
The first action item is approval of the February 13th, 2020 minutes.
I'll make a
Do I have a
motion
second?
to.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Next one is to vote to approve the educational plan for the submission to the MSBA.
Right, so we discussed the plan at the January meeting. We put it out for public comment for a month. We didn't receive any. And, we have made a few revisions because Dorn Whittier read it and they gave us some notes. I don't think it's anything substantive. There are things where they would say, it would be helpful if you put this information in a table, or the MSBA would want to see that. So I feel good about it. I think it's ready to go. And if it's approved tonight, then we can include it, well, we need to include it in our submission at the end of March to MSBA. So
That was good work. I think I mentioned in the one meeting, I learned a lot just from reading through it.
Reading?
Yeah,
Okay,
that I
well
didn't
then.
know, so,
Great.
great.
I'll make a motion.
I just wanted to say, it was a wonderful job, and I learned a lot myself.
Oh, thanks.
There's some things in there also about some of the special ed programs, And I always, the acronyms, it explained very complicated programs. I think that'd be valuable to have that ready just to show somebody that's questioning what, a lot of the different programs are.
Yeah.
Just how complicated they are.
Well, in July, we all get to go to the MSBA, where we have 20 minutes to present it, and then 20 minutes, I think of it as like thesis defense, where they're just going to ask us questions about it. So
Sounds like
I don't think it's that grueling, but so.
How do you want to spend your summer vacation?
So we're going to be in there in the summer, and the goal of it is to make sure that we're communicating what we're about in Westwood, so that they know what we're trying to do with design. So it was a good process, actually.
Great.
Right.
Do I have a motion to accept the education plan for submission to the MSBA?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. The next one is the approval of the Student Opportunity Act for submission to the Deci.
So again, we
Yeah.
presented it last month, we put it out, we didn't get any comments. I have to submit it by April 1st, and it needs school committee approval.
All right, do I have a motion to approve?
Make the motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye, unanimous. Next one is approval of the international out-of-country field trips.
Yes, so we think that we've landed the plane, no pun intended. So Maya and I had a conference call with Angela Smagula, our attorney. We had said, well, maybe Angela should come here, but then I had said, or perhaps Maya could just ask her question directly to the attorney. So we talked, and we have included some language here that we both feel like addresses the issues that we've had. Basically, what we landed on was that we'll have a process here where travel vendors, travel companies, get pre-approved by central office so that we can vet them all and look at all of those things about their policies for background checking people and make sure our concerns are met. And then if someone wants to take a trip, they can choose off of one of those pre-approved vendors. And if they go off menu, then we'll have to do the approval process before we approve the trip.
Great. All right, do I have a motion?
I just had a couple of things I
Go ahead,
wanted to ask. I've mentioned this before, and I know it's a pain in the neck, but yeah, I think it's a wonderful program. The more we do this, the better. I've often wondered, as all these kids go over, they learn things. Would it be possible maybe to ask each kid to, for us maybe, or for someone else to do like a 250-word essay on what did they learn, what did they like, would they encourage other students to do it? I mean, we talk about Spain, back and forth. Something like that would be valuable for kids thinking of trips in the future, parents interested in trips. For me, I'd love it to hear some of these stories.
I'm afraid to ask them personally,
Oh.
Charlie, based on
You know,
that.
we
that
could
they
make
were-
it, you know, you don't have to do it, that maybe,
Yeah.
if you could
A
do it.
suggestion,
you know, it's a-
okay.
The second thing is, you know, knowing how kids are and, you know, they're under discipline and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if we have any rules here where we decide, this kid's gotta get out of here.
We
you
do.
know.
So this is just the policy,
Yeah.
right? And then we have like a handbook, basically, for student conduct, and kids have to sign off on it, the parents have to sign off on it, so everybody knows what the rules are before they go on the trip. And sure, it gets to the level of, if you were to violate things, you'd be sent home.
So they would know that, and the parents too.
They would know that in advance.
And the other thing, if the kid just gets sick of, you know, the procedure for notifying people and
Yes.
that's not uncommon, you get sick from something and
All
that we
that's
have, we're
covered.
prepared for that too.
We've had it happen, yep.
Thanks.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the international out-of-country field trip policy?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a
Second.
Any discussion, further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Finally, the transfer funds from the special ed reserve account.
Okay.
Do I have to read this?
So we have a motion. The memo didn't have a specific amount. I have, Mama, if you
I
want to
passed
say
the paper,
a couple
but,
words about where.
Bottom line is that we have, in Q1, when I shared the first Q1 report, I had flagged to the school committee that we have about $225,000 in known residential tuition costs that we knew needed to hit this account. And there was an additional student that entered the district that wasn't anticipated, that also added costs. So this is why the request is now about $285,000.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay. The Westwood School Committee hereby authorizes the transfer of $285,000 from the Special Education Reserve Fund to the Special Education Cost Account.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye, unanimous.
Can I give one thing?
Oh,
I forgot to do this in the superintendent's report. I have something to give to Mr. Donahue from the preschoolers. So, Charlie very nicely donated this toy car, and what it is so you can be a mechanic. You can literally work on the car, and they love it. And so we have some nice photos of them and a thank you note that I want to pass over. Thanks so much.
Have they fixed any cars yet? I wish I had one of these myself.
That's cute.
I'll let you see it first.
do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor? Aye.